Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our Ritual Night Talk for July 27th. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these Ritual Night events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, let me get my YouTube spiel out of the way so I don't forget it. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. Number 2, like our videos. Number 3, click on the button to request notifications. That way you will know when we go online with these live events. I have included 2 links tonight. First is the donation link, which you all know what to do. Second is a link to an old article that I did on scrying with a brain machine. And the article talks a little bit more about that. Okay, what that is, and I'll cover it a little bit later on in the video. Tonight, we are talking about visualization, and we are talking about scrying, okay? And I'm going to start with visualization, and I'm going to move on to scrying because I'm convinced that one depends on the other, okay? And scrying is one of those topics that there's a whole lot of contention out there about in the magical community, especially the grimoire magical community, about, oh, you know, how scrying things need to look in order for your magic to work and stuff like that. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, I don't subscribe to that, and I'm going to go ahead and, you know, kind of go into my explanation of how I think things like spirit work of that sort can be done. The other thing I'm going to talk about is general visualization, like in ritual forms, like, for example, visualizing a pentagram when you trace the figures in the lesser ritual, the pentagram. The pentagrams are supposed to be visualized, and Crowley has some things to say about it, and I have some things to say about what he has to say about it. So I'm going to get started like this, okay? One of the things that we have in the modern world that did not exist in the Renaissance is we have film and we have television, okay? And so we have this technology that allows us to, you know, send images all over the place. We can do video calls, you know, you could, you know, watch a movie in your home theater system. It's like, and all this stuff is, you know, images are reproduced perfectly and they appear right in front of your face, okay? And so one of the things that I do think about visualization in general, not just scrying, is that people who get into magic and they think, oh, you know, I'm going to see this and this and this. Sometimes they're expecting something like what you would see on a television or a movie screen. Okay. There are people who are really good at scrying who can do that. And in fact, in the magical tradition, you will find there is kind of a history of identifying people who are good scryers and trying to get them to join magical groups and take part in magical rituals. It's pretty much established that it doesn't really seem to have to do with, you know, even, you know, how much, you know, how experienced you are with magic, or, you know, how spiritual a person you are. It seems like it has something to do with some sort of a native human ability, some way to kind of connect your visual centers in your brain to this psychic information that you're getting. Okay, so if we look at parapsychology that was done, you know, over the last century or so, it also becomes clear that there are people who have psychic abilities that don't manifest as well through vision, okay? A basic thing, the distinction between clairvoyance and clairaudience, you know, hearing, quote unquote, psychic information versus seeing psychic information. And I have found that that's a fairly generalizable model. So it works like this. You have psychic senses, which are more or less developed. Some of that is based on talent. Some of that is based on skill. Some of that is based on, you know, just training and practice over and over again, and you finally get good at it, like a lot of things in magic, okay? The thing about it is that every individual person has this psychic sense mapped into their brain in a different way, Okay, so when you watch me do the elixir rites, for example, you'll see me do this thing where I hold my hands on either side of the cup when I'm vibrating the name of the spirit, trying to get the spirit to appear. I'm not doing that because I'm projecting energy or chi into the cup. I actually do that later in the elixir rites. If you look at the script, there's another step where that happens. But what I'm doing is I'm feeling for the presence of the spirit. Okay, it seems like for me, when I do spirit work, it seems like how spirits manifest to me is there's a tactile sensation around the table of art that happens when they appear. And the other thing that I can do is I can hear them and like converse with them to a degree by means of, psychic hearing, I guess you would call it. Okay. My great grandmother was a professional medium. Maybe that's where that comes from. I don't really know. But the other thing that I know is that usually I don't see very much in magical operations. For whatever reason, my psychic senses aren't mapped very well onto my vision. And I think many people out there who have trouble with visualization, have trouble with scrying, may have the same issue. Okay. So you might think that I'm, a long-time experienced magician. I'm good at casting spells. I get, good results that I can report on, probability shifts of whatever sort. Usually the stuff I do works. And I am actually not a very good psychic visualizer. Okay. I mean, I can trace figures and stuff like that, and I can hold in my mind that the figure's there. But really, to my physical eyes, about all I see is just a little bit of sparkling in the air, and maybe with a little bit of a colored tint, and that's it. It's faint, and I have to pay attention to it to hold it in place there. I've gotten good enough that I do it, pretty automatically. I do, okay, I know the figure's there, even though I'm just kind of seeing this sort of, hazy thing, and it's fine. But I think that there are a lot of people who get started in magic and they find that that's kind of what they can do and they get discouraged. And what really is going on there is just that you're looking at somebody whose psychic senses aren't primarily mapped onto vision, like me and like a lot of other magicians that I know. Okay. And especially if you're expecting it to look like, television images, hardly anybody visualizes like that. Okay, it's really a thing where for most people the visualization it winds up being a lot fainter, and it's pretty much you do it to the point where it's there, you get comfortable with it, you get all the muscle memory conditioning and so forth around the ritual. You make sure that you're extending your consciousness when you do the figures. That might even be like what I was talking about last week with energy work, that I have this method where I'll trace the figure and then I'll breathe with that to impart it with chi and stuff like that. So in a way, that's a more visceral way of building the figure. Again, what I see is pretty faint. Okay. Now, Crowley in Liber O says the figure should be drawn as though formed from flame. An actual fire has been kindled by some with this method. But whatever the case, this is not a power to be aimed for. Okay, well, I think it's a pretty cool power to aim for. Like visualize, like a fire triangle at something, light it on fire. That's pretty cool. Okay, I have not gotten that to work. Okay, and I think that a number of places, Liber O, where Crowley's giving instructions, he's being, I think, deliberately hyperbolic. Okay, in other words, you're really supposed to put your whole will and your whole concentration into this. And I think the idea is that, well, if you're trying to force yourself to visualize it like actual flames, floating in space, what's going to happen is there's really no way that if you're trying to push your mind to do that much, it's going to get distracted. Okay. But at the same time, I think that expecting, your pentagrams to be formed of flame that looks so real, it's like a movie or CGI or something, that is something that the vast majority of magicians do not experience. Okay. And furthermore, it doesn't mean you're a failure as a magician if you have trouble doing that. And it also doesn't mean that it also does not mean that you can't cast effective spells if you can't do that well. Okay. One of the reasons that I talk about the spirit vision method of the Golden Dawn, which is kind of like, it's like a form of mental or astral projection. So what you do is and you can find some of the stuff in my blog. Maybe I should have linked to the induction for it. But anyway, what you could do is you visualize like forming a body of light. Okay, so this is like a version of yourself, maybe an idealized version of yourself, and what you do is you focus on creating the body of light, and then you shift your consciousness to the body of light, and then you go forward as though you are the body of light. And all of this is done with the technique of active imagination. Okay, and one of the advantages of active imagination with the differences that people have with psychic senses is that active imagination is like a scene that you kind of imagine in your mind, and it can include all of the different senses: feeling, hearing, seeing. And however your psychic senses are mapped, you can get access to that space by means of whatever sense happens to work for you. So in that sense, I think that it's definitely easier to learn than the eyes open scrying technique. And I've also found that the information obtained by means of that technique is as accurate as anything you get from eyes open scrying. Eyes open scrying is just forcing your eyes to connect to your psychic senses, basically. It's not something where you do a conjuration, you put a video camera, see there's the spirit. It's not like that. Or at least I've never seen anybody do it. And I've been in a couple of discussions with grimoire magicians where I've asked about that, and nobody has done it to shut me up. People who apparently do this all the time. So I don't think their spirits can be videoed or filmed. Okay. What's going on is the difference between eyes open scrying and the spirit vision technique is that the eyes open scrying, you have your eyes open at the same time that your psychic senses are engaged with your sense of vision. Okay. And it's getting all those three things to work. And once you're good at it, it's a reliable way to detect the presence of spirits. But you know what? So is holding my hands on either side of the table of art. Now, I think maybe the idea that you have to be able to visually scry the spirit comes from dealing with people who are absolute new magicians who are just picking up a book and trying to do something. Okay, it is true that you can go through some kind of a ritual procedure, and if you don't really understand it, spirit's not going to show up in your table of art, and then you can charge the air to do whatever you want, but you don't have a spirit. Okay, however, how you learn about, well, what does it feel like when a spirit shows up, is to conjure spirits, okay? And then you learn what it feels like to you, okay? And the other thing that you do is you look at your results, and probably, even if you didn't perceive anything in the temple, your positive results where you got what you wanted, especially if it was a very unlikely thing, you probably got that spirit. It's actually not that hard to get them to show up. It's harder to, in some ways, it's harder to perceive them unless you're really familiar with your psychic senses and how they work. And you become familiar with your psychic senses and how they work by doing it. Okay. So this idea that, oh, well, if you're not a good enough scryer, you just shouldn't do magic. That's the thing that or if you're not a good scryer, you can't do magic that works. That's not true either. It's only true in the very limited sense of, well, if you have absolutely no way to detect the presence of the spirit using any of your psychic senses, you can wind up in a situation where you go through a procedure and you're kind of casting blind because you aren't really sure if the spirit's there or not. Although it is very possible to cast effective magic without being able to perceive the spirit at all. Okay. And that's one of the things that is a big contentious thing on some of the grimoire discussion forums. Well, if I did a ritual and I got what I wanted, is it a success? Well, no, if you didn't scry the spirit, it's not a success. And it's but you got what you wanted. What? Especially if it was really unlikely. It's do you really think that you got something really unlikely to happen, even if you didn't perceive the spirit and you really don't think it's the result of the ritual, that's confusing to me. And maybe it's one of these things where you're talking about, again, just rank beginner magicians who are maybe trying to cast out of like a beginner book on magic or something. But the thing is, as you do that, what's going to happen is that eventually spirits are going to show up. And when they do show up and you've worked enough, you realize, oh, I sense this when it happens. And so then the spirit is there. And that, in my opinion, eliminates the necessity of this difficult for many people visual scrying technique. And we have compared information from good visual scryers and people using active imagination who are very familiar with it, like in path workings and stuff. There is no difference in the quality of the information. I have had rituals where I see things and perceive things and stuff happens at the temple. I've had rituals where I don't perceive a whole lot in the temple, except maybe a little temperature shift or wind or something really basic like that. And ritual and there is no correlation, as far as I can tell, between stuff that happens in the temple and how effective the ritual is at accomplishing a probability shift. They don't seem to be connected. I can make an argument in probability terms why, if you get paranormal effects in the temple, maybe your ritual isn't going to be as powerful. Because if you take the total probability shift of the ritual and you subtract the probability shift of, producing whatever the paranormal effect is in the temple, and we're talking about instantaneous effects, so that's a pretty high probability, then, how much of that shift is left over to transmit to your target? Well, I don't know. And I'm not to the point where I'm saying that there's a negative correlation, because I really don't have that data. I will say the ritual, I think I've mentioned this before, the ritual that I did where I saw the best visual thing. I mean, I moved my head and stuff like that. It was a shadow, all this kind of stuff. And it was definitely gone after the ritual. That ritual was an absolute failure. It didn't accomplish anything, but I did see something. So, I mean, this kind of thing is one of those impediments to doing magic, this idea that you have to normalize psychic senses mapped to vision, and that's like the only thing that works. Okay. I mean, understanding your psychic senses is super important. I mean, if you're going to do any kind of like dream work in magic, well, dreams are really not that significant. They're just like jumbles of memory and information, unless while you're dreaming, you're engaging your psychic senses. And that's where psychic dreams and prophetic dreams and stuff like that come from. And if you understand your psychic senses and work with them and do magic, which helps to develop them, you're going to find working with your dreams to be easier, because what's going to, in the sense of, you're going to be able to connect with and get real macrocosmic information that's going to be more reliable. And psychic senses come in when doing divination. It comes in when, it's one of these general things that in magic, you really want to develop your psychic senses, because essentially magic is a series of techniques for optimizing and working with those psychic senses and other manifestations of consciousness like spirits in a particularly efficient and effective manner. Okay, so moving on a little bit from that into this whole idea of, trying to learn the eyes open scrying technique. I mean, I have my mirror here. I was holding this up before. This is actually a really neat tool to make. This is a clock glass. It's the front for a grandfather clock, but you turn it around. Okay. And so what it does is it has this nice concave distortion effect. And to get the black, you just paint it with matte black paint. And then you look into the shiny side of the glass, and it's a great scrying mirror. You can order these online and, just put regular paint on them, and it works fine. The experience I had with the brain machine was using this scrying mirror. And so what a brain machine is it's a binaural light and sound machine. And the idea is that it uses sounds and flashing lights to induce specific brainwave frequencies. What researchers have found is that if you have a flashing light and a corresponding tone, what'll happen is it'll entrain your brain to be running at a particular frequency. And the program that I use is called an alpha It's a very common program that you can find for meditation. One of the big proponents of use of the brain machine is Ken Wilber, and his big recommendation was use the brain machine to meditate to induce alpha and theta states. And so it's a program that every single possible brain machine has. The one that I have is a Nova Pro 100. I think it's like actually listed in the article of the one that I used for for that experiment. And I mean that's the one that I still use for those kinds of experiments. And it's a little more expensive, but there are smaller, less expensive ones that they make now, and all of them have this alpha theta program. It's not hard to find at all. And so what I did to get myself from, oh, I can't scry at all visually, to, hey, this is working the way it's supposed to work, is I ran the alpha theta program on the brain machine for 10 minutes before I started scrying. And that was pretty amazing. It's like, okay, so I do this, sit down, look into the mirror. Okay, so the instructions are, oh, it's supposed to get kind of cloudy or whatever, and then it's going to kind of shift into images and stuff. And it kind of did. I mean, I looked at, oh, it's getting cloudy when I look at it. It's never done that before. And then I could actually see some stuff. And also, it's this kind of visceral experience where you have this kind of hyper focus. That's kind of interesting too. But and so if you want to experiment with that, that's a simple, technological thing that you can do to help induce your ability to do it. I mean, clearly it's got to be related to somehow getting your brain, getting, the visual cortex of your brain, which is where the lights are going in, kind of into that alpha theta kind of frequency. And it's very possible that if you took people who were good natural scryers and you put an EEG on them and had them do it, what you might actually find is, and I wouldn't be even remotely surprised by this, is if you see, the alpha theta firing in the area of the visual cortex. So basically, you're training your visual cortex a certain way so that it resonates with your eyes. And then if your psychic senses are working, your psychic senses can get mapped onto that. However, what I will also say is, I have not used this technique terribly often because I find that, the spirit vision active imagination technique produces just as good information. It doesn't require tools. It doesn't, and it doesn't depend on any one particular sense. So most people who try it are going to be able to do it. I understand there are people in the world who can't visualize at all. This is apparently a mutation that some people have. And I have never worked with anybody like that, but it would be kind of interesting I think it would be actually not kind of, it would be very interesting to see how somebody who actually can't visualize at all, how they relate to their psychic senses. I'm guessing it would be something more like what I wind up doing, which is, using kinesthetic sense, maybe using hearing or something like that to do the communication and perceive the spirits. There really is no reason why other senses can't be mapped that way, and there's no reason why you can't get information that way as well. Psychic impressions of, whatever sort. Now, spirit vision, one of the tricks, though, that you got to learn is that you've got to kind of go with it and not doubt yourself, okay? It's really easy with spirit vision, and it's harder with eyes open scrying for your mind to kind of wander off. Yeah, but aren't I making this all up? Okay, well, you are kind of, but if you are doing the technique correctly, what's going to happen is that psychic information is going to flow into that imaginary space that you're working with, and that psychic information can communicate things of value to you. So here is the trick. And this works for tons of people. It works for people who are like naturally self-conscious or whatever about their spirit vision work. Okay. When you sit down to meditate, if you're and project into the spirit vision, if you are the kind of person who goes, oh yeah, I'm not really seeing that, this kind of dismissive thing, here's what you say to yourself. You say, all right, if I were able to do this, and if I were visualizing and connecting to, the spirit realm I'm trying to connect to, what I would be seeing, and then just imagine that. And seriously, it's like a fake it till you make it thing. And you really only have to do it a few times for the most part. I mean, unless you really don't have the ability to visualize at all. It seems like a lot of people who get derailed by the self-consciousness thing of it, that just totally does it. And then just write it down. Talk to spirits, get things like numbers, get things like words of power. Make sure you test what you're interacting with. And then compare that to any information you got, any messages you got, and see if there's consistency. And if there is, hey, you got an accurate connection. And by the way, that is how I compare information obtained from eyes open scrying versus spirit vision. I use similar methods in both cases. And I look at, okay, what is the validity? What is the match of the information that I'm receiving? And if it matches, it matches. That's a success. If it doesn't match, that's not a success. It doesn't matter what method you're using. Okay. Now, one of the things I will say, though, about eyes open scrying is that it feels more convincing. Okay. So spirit vision, okay, you're getting information. It kind of feels like you're imagining stuff, except you're coming up with stuff that you wouldn't normally come up with. And that's the psychic information coming into your vision. Okay. Now, with eyes open scrying, you're kind of riveted to this thing, and the information that comes over, it's a little more, it feels more definite. It feels less like you're imagining something because your eyes are open and focused on this thing. It sort of looks external, right? And as I say, we know it's not because you can't film it or anything like that. But that convincingness, to my way of thinking, it's pretty extreme to go from that to, oh, well, if you can't do eyes open scrying, you can't do magic. Okay. Number one, Crowley's dichotomy, which comes from the Golden Dawn of invocation versus evocation. Grimoire people hate that, by the way. They're like, oh, you're using it incorrectly. And well, we are, in the sense that both evocation and invocation, they both, if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, they're both words for calling up spirits. There isn't really any kind of an orientation implied there. However, the Golden Dawn that Crowley learned from did talk about the idea of invoking a spirit is calling it into your sphere of sensation, and evoking a spirit is calling it into some kind of a containment structure. Proper English, yeah, they mean the same thing. Golden Dawn and Thelema, you see them, they are used in that particular way, and they are redefined in those traditions. That is not, the standard English definition of the term. Maybe it will be someday when tons and tons of people are doing magic and Thelemic magic and stuff. But yeah, that's not really what it's about. And so when I use the terms, I'm using them in the entirely modern way from the Thelemic system, just to be clear about that. So with the spirit vision, you can very easily do invocation. You can call a spirit into your sphere of sensation. So, you literally can visualize in the spirit vision yourself calling the spirit into yourself. And it really does work. The spirit really is present there. It's not like a full spirit possession kind of experience. It's like one of the issues that I see sometimes in writing from early 20th century magic is, well, there's this possession and then there's invocation. They're not the same thing. Possession is a more extreme full body kind of experience, whereas this is more, it's connecting your active imagination, which is part of your sphere of sensation, to your psychic senses, and through your psychic senses to the manifestation of consciousness, that is the spirit out there in the universe, or deity, or however you want to consider it, that you want to connect with. And you can call that into your sphere of sensation. You can ask them, empower my sphere of sensation to do this, 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 this. That kind of thing works. And, Crowley writes, oh, well, once magicians get good, they'll just invoke everything and not really do evocation. And I disagree with that too, because invocation is great for working on yourself, consciousness expansion, mystical realization, a lot of that stuff. It's great for all of that stuff. But evocation into a containment structure, like a Trithemian table of art, like the triangle from the Megaton Goetia, like the Sigillum de Amath from the D apparatus, conjuring spirits into a structure like that, as I've talked about, can be very useful in terms of concentrating the effect on, say, an external target or an external situation. You put a link like that structure and you evoke. Generally, if you're going to use the eyes open scrying with that, you use the mirror, you put it on top of, I have my sigil and diamonds right here. So I'd actually, this is the back of the mirror. So I mean, I would mount it like that on a stand and just stare into it. It's pretty straightforward. That part of it is getting the whole thing to click. That's where a lot of the difficulty is. But being able to target your practical operations by means of having this pocket universe such that you can then place a magical link in, then you can conjure a spirit into, then you can, deliver a charge and have an effect. That is extremely useful. If you try to do that by pulling everything into your sphere of sensation, what you're going to find is it works fine for, positive energy like healing, prosperity, and stuff like that. The effect on any external target isn't going to be as strong, but you're going to get some of the same benefit when you do the spell. The same thing, though, is true of any sort of negative magic or cursing, okay? You cast a negative magic, again, within your sphere of sensation, basically it's hard to work with without getting some on you, okay? Whereas with a containment structure, you have a full separation and you can do your spells in a much more technical way. So to my way of thinking, it depends on the type of thing you're trying to do. If your orientation is fundamentally personal and mystical, from that standpoint, invocation is great. It's more effective to try and shift your own call on a spirit to shift your own consciousness when it's actually right within your sphere of sensation, as opposed to in a containment structure where then you have to have a link back to you, and so that's messy. You can invoke to do changes to yourself, and including enlightenment, mystical realization. All that stuff can be done in your sphere of sensation, and the basic technique for that is the active imagination technique. Okay. But if you want to continue to do effective practical magic, and I don't understand why you wouldn't, even if you get to a point in your development where your orientation is more mystical, there's always going to be stuff out there in the world that, you want to move around or shift or change or do something with. And so evocation remains a viable practice. And as a result, being able to perceive the spirit also remains a viable practice that you're going to be using throughout your career studying magic. Now, as far as the idea of, having to get to, having to perceive the spirit to a certain degree to get a powerful, effective operation, like I said earlier, really that perception is pretty much yes or no. Okay, either the spirit's there or the spirit's not. There isn't a thing where I got a manifestation of a spirit that was strength 3, so my spell is strength 3. It doesn't really work that way. When you call on a spirit to do something, the spirit shows up. It will impress, the moment of creation, like on a talisman, for example. So you could take astrological effects and find, well, here's my astrological election for a talisman, and then I'm going to conjure, these spirits. I'm going to charge them like this. And what that'll do is then the talisman can capture that moment of creation and then just run as a permanent magical effect. Okay. But the spirit itself is going to, it might show up stronger. You might feel it stronger sometimes. You might feel it weaker sometimes. But if you feel it, you've got a connection. And fundamentally, delivering a charge to a spirit is simply about communicating information. And so it's like, as long as the spirit understands what you're saying to it and what you're directing it to do. And spirits, once you have a connection, they can also read your surface thoughts. So it's not even like there's like an intensity that you have to deliver a charge or something like that. Or, you don't have to be in a place where you've got this like incredible, visualization and only if it's perfect does it work. Again, that's not how it works. It's very much a case of fake it till you make it, like with the active imagination. If you really want to know what visual scrying is like, and you just have all this trouble doing it, maybe look into something like a brain machine, or find a friend who has one and borrow one. I mean, it worked the first time for me. It's like it really is not the kind of thing where you need to borrow it for a long time and work with it and work with it and work with it. The point is, it's a pretty fast effect. Third, don't expect the things you see to look like television images. And if they do, that doesn't necessarily mean they're more accurate. It means that your eyes and your brain are synced better. But the psychic information is what you're really looking for. We did do a test one time with somebody who's a really good scryer and who saw stuff. Oh, yeah, it's just like watching TV. Okay. And we did the thing where we conjured up the spirit and then we interrogated the scryer. Okay, here's a question. What is the spirit saying? What's the information we're getting back? And let me tell you, we tallied up those notes. And as far as I can tell, there was nothing especially accurate about them. We were thinking, oh, we'll see some like correlations because, this person was not very familiar with the magic we were doing, which is one of the Renaissance techniques, is find somebody who doesn't really know anything about your operation to scry for you. Like some grimoires recommend, have, a small child and you don't communicate, any of your objective to them, and have them just train them enough that they can look into the thing and see, probably pick somebody pretty talented. And then you just ask them questions and they give you the answers, not really knowing what the meaning of the answer is. And the idea is, more of that information will come out of psychic space in that situation. Well, in our case, it didn't seem like it worked that way. It seems like the stuff that I do with my psychic senses, which is less visual and more leaning toward other senses, that seems to be at least as accurate, if not more accurate. And my guess is what you're going to find is that when you experiment and you work on this stuff for yourself, you're going to find your own kind of combination of psychic senses that are going to give you the most reliable and most accurate information. And that there is, I would say how you should go forward with perceiving spirits, communicating with spirits, and so on. And as you do practices, especially daily practices, your other psychic senses are going to get better. That's another thing I've talked about where because of that effect, that's given rise to like some superstitions like, oh, like there are like little spirits are like attached to you when you start working magic. And that's actually not true. Little spirits are freaking everywhere all the time. But when you do your practices and your psychic senses start to get good enough, you start perceiving them. Okay. And so part of the point of that is if you do that, you get to that point and all of a sudden you're perceiving these things. Well, your psychic senses turned on. That's great. Okay. And so, but understand that don't be freaked out by that because that's just kind of the natural condition of the universe. These things are all over the place. And, if you don't develop your psychic senses, they only fly right by you and stuff, and you just don't see them. I mean, they could even interact with you and like affect things like your luck and stuff like that. And if you don't have the ability to perceive them, you'll just think, why am I unlucky today? And, so it's always better to know what's going on. It's always better to do the daily practices. It's always better to develop your psychic senses. And you should develop your psychic senses however they work, because they are the main senses that you're going to be using to do a lot of magical stuff. At least, if you want to connect with macrocosmic spirits and obtain macrocosmic information, by psychic means, you use psychic senses that just happen to be mapped differently for everyone. And so this is another case of know thyself. If you understand how your psychic senses work, you can start getting better at practicing connecting to them and working with them. And I mean, just like energy work from last week, that type of work on your psychic senses will only improve your practice and it will only increase your ability. You'll be able to communicate with spirits more easily. You'll be able to perceive when a spirit is present after you do the conjuration, or more specifically, once you're good at it, more specifically, the rare occasion where something doesn't show up, which is actually quite unusual if you practice this stuff a lot, and things like that. So, and keep in mind that you don't necessarily want to listen to people who are saying magic only works this way. Watch out for the only, okay? There are some basic principles, okay? Scrying is a perfectly good way to perceive the presence of a spirit, okay? But when somebody says it's the only way, you should be suspicious. Consciousness is the primary variable in magical operations, and it's the reason that we can't do as scientific an investigation of magic as we might like, because consciousness is a variable that we can't measure. It's entirely subjective at this point. And so, but because of that, your individual consciousness is a key variable in how magic works for you in terms of visualization, perception, communication, all that stuff. Basically, you want to play to your strengths, and you want to go into your magical practice using your psychic senses in a way that works well for you instead of struggling to use them in a way that does not. All right, I'm going to wrap that up here tonight for tonight. And this is a, there's a lot of stuff in here. The spirit vision thing, that's a great thing to practice. You want to try the brain machine, see if how good you can get at the eyes open scrying. That's cool too. You can take a look at the article, have a link. Photosonics makes the Nova Pro. You can find other ones online though that are less expensive. You can also find, apparently there's like binaural videos out on YouTube and stuff like that for different meditation states too. And if there wasn't an alpha theta one out there, I would be absolutely shocked. You can experiment with that too. Just go find an alpha theta video and just, play it and really concentrate on it. And then, go to your temple and, see if the scrying process works better for you. And that would be an interesting experiment. I have not done it. It would be interesting to hear about that from somebody. I've just used the flashing light machine, which seems to work well for me. So with that, I'm going to repeat the YouTuber spiel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, request notifications. So then you'll know when we go online with these events for our ritual night talks and other rituals. And with that, I am going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a great rest of the evening. Love is the law, love under will.